G'day and welcome back to the channel. So today's video is for anyone who has ever sprained their ankle before. And what I want to go through in this video is I want to give you some really important pieces of information that you need to make sure that you're either aware of or putting into practice to make sure that you've fully recovered from that ankle injury and you're not susceptible for another one or something else happening down the track. Because what we know with ankle sprains is that if you've had one ankle sprain, that ankle is at least 4 to 6 times more likely to re-injure itself going forward in the future. But more importantly, 1 in 5 people who sprain their ankle go on to injure either the knee, the hip, or the lower back at some stage in the future. So it goes without saying that if your ankle now feels better, we also need to make sure that it's functioning normally again to decrease the risk of you having to care about anything else down the track. So what we tend to find clinically is there's generally 3 main things that you need to make sure that you've ticked off once the pain has gone away to give yourself the best chance of returning to full ankle function and decreasing any potential risk of an ankle issue or any other issue going forward. And those 3 things are ankle mobility, ankle strength, and balance. So the first thing that's really important to touch on with this is we want to talk about ankle mobility. Now, it might sound strange that we're focusing on the concept of ankle mobility when the common perception of an ankle sprain or an ankle injury is that the ligaments become looser and more lax. Now, obviously, when that tissue's healing, we'd expect that laxity or that looseness to tighten up a little bit inherently. But what happens basically when your ankle is generally looser with an ankle sprain is that the joint underneath, the joint capsule underneath, has a tendency to become stiff and tight to compensate for that lack of stability. And it's that capsular restriction, that capsular stiffness that isn't often focused on specifically enough long after your pain and function has returned. It can increase the chances of you re-injuring that ankle or causing a problem further up the chain. So it goes without saying that we need to give you and make sure that you have a really good level of ankle mobility, but making sure that that mobility returns to a fantastic level to decrease the side effects of being stiff over time. And a great way to do this is by grabbing a band of some sort, whether it's a power band or a TheraBand or a strap that has some give in it. We want to place that band below the level of your ankle bone. Again, it's best to do this obviously once you are confident that your ankle ligaments are feeling better and the pain has reduced somewhat. We don't want to go stretching out your ankle joint if those ligaments are still healing or are still tender or sore in some way. But what we want to get you to do is we want to stretch that band out as far as you feel comfortable. Then what we want to try and do here is we want to bend your back ankle as far as you feel comfortable. But the thing we need to pay attention to here is what tends to happen is if you have a stiff ankle joint, then what you'll find is your knee will come as far forward as it will, but then you might find that you'll have to turn your ankle out, or your knee might cave in to go around that restriction to complete the task or to give you that extra range of motion. And this is one of the main mechanisms for why a knee can become grumbly with someone who has a stiff ankle, is that the knee is coping or suffering the consequences of going around a stiff ankle. So what we want to get you to do, again, is making sure that your feet are straight. We want to make sure that your knee's almost rotated out a little bit. And when you stretch through this, we want to make sure that you can find some of that restricted tissue in your ankle. Please make sure you find a level that feels comfortable, because we want to stay here for 30 seconds or 60 seconds or 2 minutes, whatever you feel is appropriate for you. But what should happen is once you've found that stretch and you've done that stretch for a period of time, you should instantaneously feel a little bit lighter or a little bit looser through that ankle than what you did before starting that exercise. So the second thing to focus on if you've ever sprained your ankle before is trying to reclaim some fantastic normal strength and conditioning through the tissues around that ankle joint. So we're going to touch on 3 different exercises that you can focus on in this space, and they tend to address some of the main muscles that need to be strong and need to get that strength back after you've sprained your ankle. So the first 2 exercises that we're going to touch on are variations on a common calf raise exercise. But the first exercise we're going to work on is to try and strengthen the big gastrocnemius muscle, the one at the back of the calf, the one that forms the bulk. But what we want to get you to do here is finding a pole or a wall that you can hold on to. Ideally, you would do this off the step. The reason being is that when you're coming up all the way, you also want to come down as far as you feel comfortable to tie in some of that lengthening and some of the mobility that's important to rehab an ankle sufficiently. So not only are we getting some muscular stretching here, but if we're trying to free up the joint capsule, the ankle joint capsule as well, this can be a really great way to do that to get sort of more bang for your buck with the exercise. So depending on how comfortable you feel here, we can get you to start with 2 feet, making sure that you're coming all the way up and all the way down. Progress to 1 if you feel you can. But the main thing we want to focus on here step, ideally we want the load to be going up and down through that second or third toe. And you might find that by focusing on coming up and down through that second and third toe, you'll feel the burn or the fatigue in areas of the tissue that you didn't necessarily realize that you were getting beforehand. But it's just a great way to control this. The way that we can progress this is we can basically do this to a particular cadence. So if you want to do 1 second up, 1 second down, if you set a beat or a metronome to make sure that you can keep that timing when you're doing this, again, to build up some of that strength and conditioning. But we want to do enough of this exercise to make sure that you find some fatigue through those calf muscles. And then the second variation of this focuses more on the soleus muscle, which is the muscle down lower. But what we want to get you to do to bias that muscle is if you can bend your knees as far as you feel comfortable. Again, this is a great exercise to do because it's also trying to improve the mobility of your ankle as well. And then same thing again, keeping your knees where they are, just coming all the way up, all the way down below the step, all the way up, and then all the way down again. Same idea, paying close attention to how you feel fatigue-wise, but also making sure the pressure goes through that second and third toe just to load up the tissue more normally. And then once you find that those particular calf raise exercises become too easy, we can go down a few different paths. We can start to add load to that, working up towards at least 1 to 1.5 times your body weight, but also then progressing to more functional things like hopping and jumping and skipping and then bounding and running. And then the third strength exercise that you can focus on revolves around some of the muscles at the front of the ankle. And a really easy way to do this, again, you can do this off a step as well, provided that you feel like your heels aren't going to slide off and you have something to hold on to. You can basically just come up and down as far as you feel comfortable. Again, we want to make sure that you try and take it through some degree of full range of motion. This step probably isn't high enough for me, but we want to make sure that we reclaim that range of motion in all directions, not just the dorsiflexion or the ankle bending back position, but also the ankle pointing forwards position as well. It's all relevant. Even if you don't need to use that day to day, you should still have that day to day just in case you do need it. Your ankle isn't normal if you don't have that range of motion. But again, we want to do enough of these that you feel like you can start to get to a point where it starts to feel quite challenging and quite hard, but fatiguing yourself over time. If you don't have a step, you can certainly lean back up against something. The further out you go, the harder it tends to get. So choose a level that feels most challenging for you. You can take some extra weight off one side, place it on the other side if you want to. But again, make sure you're fatiguing those muscles enough to see progress over time, comparative right versus left. So once you've started ticking off some of that residual ankle mobility deficits and also started to work on some of the muscular strength around that ankle and also the endurance, the power, the conditioning that goes beyond that, the third aspect is making sure that your body has control of that ankle in the form of balance-related exercises. Now, the interesting thing about your balance is that the two things we just touched on in terms of your range of motion and your strength can also be very closely linked to a decrease in balance after an injury. Obviously, if your ankle is stiffer, it doesn't have the ability to maneuver itself as well. If your ankle is weaker, again, it doesn't have the ability to stabilize itself as well. So we need to tie all this in together and then train you in some balance and some progressively harder balance exercises to build that back up again. But when doing any balance exercises, it's always really important to remember that you need to do it somewhere safe. If you can do it right next to a post or a pole, or if you're at home, if you can do it in the back corner where there's a wall, have a chair in front of you, maybe in the corner of a room is great with a chair in front. So if you do lose your balance, you can't go anywhere. But also if you have something next to you that you know is there, we're going to challenge your balance by closing your eyes at some stage. So it's really important that you know exactly where the post is or where your stable structure is, so that if you lose your balance, you've got something to hold on to without having to open your eyes. Don't do your balance in a way where your hands are by your side or your hands away from your object, so that if you lose your balance, you then have to try and find it and hopefully catch it before you might lose that balance. So a great way to start with this is we can get you to start with your feet together. We can get you to stand here for 30 seconds, just making sure that you feel really happy and really safe. If this is too easy for you, as I said, I'll get you to close your eyes. Make sure you can do this for 30 seconds. If you can, then we can move on to the next thing. The next thing to do is, again, just trying to narrow that base of support further. So if we can have your injured foot in front, we can do this sort of tandem stance, again, where you want to be up nice and tall, have your weight about 50-50 forward and back foot. If this feels easy for you after 30 seconds, you can close your eyes. And then again, if this still feels easy for you, making sure that you've got something to hold on to, then you can shift your weight further and further forward over the top of your injured side or less than ideal side, to the point where as soon as you feel you can basically have 99% of your body weight with your eyes closed, you can open them again and then stand up and just practice a single leg balance. So again, this is really important. There was a study that came out probably 12 months ago from the date of this video that showed that if you can stand on one leg for 10 seconds, your risk of dying decreases dramatically over time. So it goes without saying that standing and being able to balance on one foot for as long as possible is a really important functional thing to do in general, but also is really important to retrain and reclaim that normal function of your ankle. So again, once you find standing on one foot becomes too easy, then you close your eyes, making sure that you know where your post is if you need it. Again, we want to get to 30 seconds, if you can get to a minute. It'd be great to be able to do this in a way that you feel by the end of this, you find some great fatigue around the muscles of your ankle. One of the exercises that we didn't include in the strength portion of this video are exercises that work on the muscles on the inside and the outside of your shin and your ankle, because you tend to get a really good workout when you're doing balance at a level that's challenging for you. Obviously, you can work specific exercises of those into the mix, but I like to get that from this particular exercise if you feel challenged enough. Now again, if you can close your eyes for 30 seconds and this feels too easy, what you can then do is you can grab a cushion or a pillow, stand on that, make that harder for you again. If you want an extra challenge, you can stand on one foot on a pillow, you can throw things against the wall, you can do other things with your arms just to make sure that you are challenged in a way that is meaningful to you. So once again, it's really important to remember that once your pain goes away, once that ankle starts to feel better and you feel like you're back doing the things that you want to do, that's obviously a very important milestone to tick off, but it's not the end of your rehab process. Obviously, your want and your motivation, your care factor will naturally decrease once the pain has gone away and you feel like you've returned to sport or returned to your previous activities. But it's really important that you take the time to explore how mobile your ankle is, how strong that ankle is, and how well you're balancing on that ankle to decrease the risk of re-injuring that ankle in the future, but also making sure that you don't start to develop some knee, some hip, or some lower back dysfunction as well. So once again, I genuinely hope that was helpful. If it was, please let me know in the comments down below. Please consider leaving a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new and you enjoy this type of content. But with that being said, as always, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye.